Justice Thomas's point is on point when you look at this ruling out of the United States Supreme Court. And that is an enumerated right in the United States Constitution. Our First Amendment rights, our right to religious liberty, is something wholly different than a created right by the United States Supreme Court. And I think that's the conflict that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, but as you said earlier, the Supreme Court didn't really come down to any kind of decision on this case. They basically punted it, which means we could see a similar case like this make its way up to the Supreme Court. And yes, it's a conflict between a state's law prohibiting discrimination against gay couples and First Amendment rights of that baker.
And so do you agree with me when I say on this program, I said it yesterday, I'll say it again right now, this really is not about gay rights per se. This is about the First Amendment. This is about religious liberty.
Yeah, I don't think this case really came down to gay rights. I think especially for the plaintiff, according to his attorneys, it came down to his expressed First Amendment right that if he didn't want to design a wedding cake for a gay couple, then he didn't have to. And he says the government shouldn't infringe on my right to do that. So I do agree with you in many ways. All
right. So to me, this is a huge victory for the First Amendment, no matter how you slice it.
I don't think it's a huge victory for the First Amendment.
And why is that?
Because as you said, and as your people that you interviewed in the segments before, this was a narrow, very narrow ruling, and not narrow in the sense of the number of votes either way, narrow in the sense it didn't really create any precedent. It basically punted on this issue. So I don't think it was a victory in any way for First Amendment rights.
Well, the victory for the First Amendment of this baker at the very least, right? So he because of his religious beliefs, says, hey, I don't want to bake the cake for these people because it's a violation of my religious beliefs. It's a victory for him and his First Amendment rights, correct?
Okay, I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
All right. Okay, now, but it leaves the door open
as victory overall in the broader sense.
Okay, and it leaves the door open for the state of Colorado to go back and redress this issue, does it not? And look at it in a different light and not be so pejorative, and possibly this thing could end up back at the Supreme Court.
I think you nailed it. I think this thing is going to end up back at the Supreme Court because there are laws like this, similar laws that Colorado had in states, a lot of states, and I can see the conflict arising again. And I think, though, that the facts of this case are unique because if the Supreme Court had actually ruled on kind of the bigger picture constitutional issues, the question would really come down to, was the baker expressing his First Amendment rights through cake designing? Does that count? It's an interesting case, but I think you're right. It's going to be taken back up by a higher court, and most certainly probably by the U.S. Supreme Court at some point.
I don't know if the cake is some sort of symbol of his First Amendment rights or not, but I do believe that the baker and the cake maker, one and the same, has First Amendment rights, and his religious beliefs are his religious beliefs, and no government can impose themselves upon an American's religious beliefs. I think, to me, that's what the case comes down to. But isn't it interesting that Anthony Kennedy wrote the majority? And so if the case was broader, given what we know about Anthony Kennedy, he might not have come down on the majority, right?
Again, I think you probably are right, given especially the gay marriage decision that came down in 2015. But this was a walk-the-line decision where the Supreme Court was able to get many of even some of their liberal members, including Elena Kagan, on the side of 7-2 to rule in favor of the baker.
Yeah, and Justice Kennedy, of course, is rumored he may be stepping down. More on that in just a second. But I want to talk about a case that's pending that we should find out, I don't know, in a matter of days, and it's regarding gerrymandering, which is suddenly a big issue in this country, I suppose, because the Democrats are making it a big issue right now. Two cases regarding gerrymandering, Gill versus Whitford out of Wisconsin, and Binsenek versus Lamone out of Maryland. You know, it's interesting, the way I interpret the United States Constitution, I don't see any role whatsoever of the courts in terms of writing the districts for Congress. It seems to me that there could be a possibility here that the court took this case in order to not render a ruling. I don't know if that's ever been done in the history of the United States Supreme Court, but I would argue that the court has no role here whatsoever, thus shouldn't even be rendering a decision.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One America News on YouTube, and call your cable provider and kindly demand that One America News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.